right. So welcome back. For the ones that are already back from the break.
Yes, I think.
So, and in the meantime, I can have a look at the questions.
Yeah.
And I think there's the question from Barbara,
Yeah.
and she writes, the fee-based online-only programs are growing both qualitatively and quantitatively, and they will become a bigger competition. And I would fully agree on that.
Yeah.
That they will they are in, let's say, in a disadvantage in that sense that they ask for fees, which puts us in maybe in a better position, but at the same time they are much more on that attitude of being, let's say, agile, and trying things out and moving towards that direction that has the highest demand because they're market oriented in a way. And that works, I think, quite well in terms of improvement over time. And I had the chance to recently to look a little bit into the paid programs of Udacity. Um, and I was quite positively surprised by the amount of content and the quality of the teaching that they had there. And I still remember the beginnings of Udacity when they started with their first online MOOC on artificial intelligence years ago. But it's quite interesting to see how they developed and how the value also could be seen. So I agree with you, Barbara, that this is becoming a problem.
Yeah, actually, Barbara, I think, yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, and I think there is even another problem because if we look at digital products, digital services, and for the most digital services like search engines or whatever product, you know, better than me, at the end there are only a few big players, and because of a lot of users, it's easy to develop high quality content, even if it costs so much, because if you have thousands and 10,000 or 100,000 of users, the costs per user, it isn't a lot. And if you think of a lot of, well, let's say products that, or university, well, I call it products, but it's not the right name, you know, but we have something like content that, well, in Austria, I think thousands or 10,000s of students are consuming. And in German-speaking countries, even more. And in English-speaking countries, so much more, yeah? So what one possibility is that for these big topics, that at the end there will be some big players that provide high quality content for low cost for the students. And what's the role of the universities at the end? And there will be a role for specific programs, for programs that are connected to the local situations and so on. But the students will not need us for, in German there's this nice word Vorlesung, and it means lecture, and if you translate it, it means reading from a paper. And students don't need us for this in the future, will not need us for this in the future. And so I think we are in a situation where the things are changing. You in IT and me in e-learning, there is a faster development, but I think at the end, the higher education system and in more future, even the other parts of the education system will be part of this transition, if we want or if we don't want.
Yeah, of course. So
Actually,
I see that as well, and I would go even further that this content, this high quality digital content, is maybe costly at the beginning. Then it's reasonably priced in the middle times, and then it gets free in the end, right? And you only have to pay if you want to take that certification afterwards. So only the assessment is being priced, and everything else is offered for free to attract the students. So I see that as well, and that was one of the points that I tried to address as a challenge. And I think our role is the role of guidance and anticipation of learning progress of the individual student or student group, because that's something that is not so easy to scale, right? Of course, also that could be done online, and there are interesting peer assessment reviews tasks which work well in terms of scalability. But in those in those lectures, I think the interesting part for the students is not that we're reading out the slides, but that what we're saying that is not written on the slides, or the story that we tell in order to explain what is the pattern behind the concept that is on the slides, and so on, right? I think there will be the role for us as students, and that's also the area where we could perform and create a difference for the student in a way. And I think it's important that we do not forget about that, or that the organization does not forget about this aspect and us in the end, right? So we should encourage, extend this part, but sometimes I get the opposite impression, right?
Yes.
So it's
See
a challenge.
I see it the same way, and if at the end only those things stay at university were that are not scalable, and that well, let's say higher learning things that you really need a tutor that is really competent, then those things that the lecturers need to know are much higher than now. So we need to
read more.
Yes.
Work more. Yeah.
Yes. If we don't only read the slides, but only answer the questions, we need to know more.
Yeah, of course. And usually we do tell more than what is on the slides, and I think that's what makes the thing interesting, right? Also for the students there in a way. Okay.
May I add one point?
Yeah, of course.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
I haven't seen you for a long time. Yes, that's right. As you call it, the fee-based programs students or people have to pay for, I would say, can be a competition, really. But so far, I think they are only a competition in terms of whether you can, let's say, buy more or less a degree there. The main thing is, of course, we care about our courses, course designs, and so on. But one thing I realize in my lectures, for example, so far the students haven't changed really. They are kind of more maybe partly they're digital natives and call themselves this way, but most of them still haven't learned how to cope with it and really be self-motivated learners who really want to know what they need to know and know what they want to know and how to get it and what to do for it. So I sometimes still feel like the nasty teacher who has to tell them what to do, because there are so many possibilities. There's so much content, but most are just, I call it, just too lazy in a way to make use of the content. So far, I'm not afraid really of those fee-based programs, as long, of course, as there's really a sort of assessment where you say, okay, when you do that, and then you earn a degree, but it's really a valuable degree and not just money you bought for to call yourself a master of this and that. Yeah. So that might be a problem, but so far I think there's lots of changes necessary in the conception of being a student. Yeah, and what am I expected to do as a student at a higher university or higher education, like universities or universities of applied science? So I still see a problem in this way.
Barbara?
Yes. On the one hand, Andrea, I agree, the students haven't changed. And some times ago, I thought the same way as you, these programs, they just buy their master. And if they do the same in my program, they have to do much more work and they will learn much more.
Okay.
Yes, but I think this was an opinion. Well, let's say I had the chance to look in some distance programs in didactic design, and in more or less detail. And also some students of mine took part in these programs parallel to their study program. And these were students who were heads of study programs themselves. So the discussion with them about the quality about these courses was high level. They were not only studying e-learning, they were also ahead of study programs. And the bad news for us, for traditional program head of programs, is the quality is really high. The quality of the content, the quality of in some programs, not all, but some have really high quality, like Carsten said, and the content and the learning path are good for the bad students. So they're a good learning path for them, for those who don't have any knowledge, and for those who are normally lost. Because the content is really, from a didactical point, it's well made, and in different forms, in 5 different forms, each content. So audio, video, learning path, and more. And we wouldn't do this for 25 students, but they have thousands of students per module. So it's a different setting. But
of course, yes,
but they are really good. And the other,
there is the danger, but still we don't have it. But there might be a danger, of course. Yeah.
Well, I think it's different if I have an e-learning program, so it's nearer than in your program. And what I even see is that my children in school, my children have an e-learning course. I'm buying for them a sofa tutor, so they are used to these e-learning programs because me, as the mother, is buying them. And monthly is paying a monthly fee, so that we don't need any additional person, because there are guided videos and tests and things like that. So maybe not in school, but the the overall setting is that the schools children who are more and more used to this setting. And so I think, and more and more used to high quality content, because those content for school children, it highly scales because the content in math for the 11-year-old children, it's the same in the whole country, and a lot of parents are able and willing to pay before they pay an additional teacher, and it's still happening. And well, I know a lot of things are nearer if you are in the field of e-learning, but I think it will be in the other parts too. And it is also nearer in IT. And it's a question of time. But I think I think I and maybe most of us we will see what is happening. It will come.
Actually, I would like to add a layer of complexity, Barbara. I completely agree with you. But if you look, for example, at, or clear example here, if you look at the IT section, if you have a business, big business here in Europe, for example, most probably you will go for programmer in India, and you don't know them. You don't know if they already studied at a high university or just learn the content from YouTube.
Yes.
So it's also the market that our student will work with.
Yes,
so
that's true.
I don't think, I think the market now looking for people who has skills, has soft skills, rather than people who get certificate from this university or that university. So
Yes.
we need to really compete against these platforms, and this competition is to organize strong, good, and flexible courses that can meet the needs of the other students or different students.
And that's also what I meant with informal learning, for example. So it's not only the degree that might qualify for a certain job. If you take the perspective of an HR department of any company, but you might also feed on other sources of qualifications that are currently not really explicitly specified, right? But will be in the future. Andrea, you wanted to add something, I guess.
Just one thing I wanted to say. So the discussion now basically was about those content, was rather content based, and of course, we don't have the time at the way it is at universities in general. We don't have the time, we don't have the money, to do it this way. But I don't think that's really a problem, because in a way, there's many more ways. It's not only those online teaching programs and content-based stuff, and which you get in various versions, digital and so on. I think that's not the problem. The problem is, how do we define ourselves? And we have to kind of establish ourselves as something that is valued, because just content-based courses you can consume online in the brightest pictures and sounds. I think that's just one point, but what do we do as university, and what is our role in that big, it's a game in a way, yeah? So we have to define our responsibility, and we are the institutions really who can decide what to teach our students, in what way to do it, and really challenging students and go beyond. What you said before, it's always going beyond, and not just content teaching, it's going beyond. And I think that's something we can and should do at university. That's something usually a bright, marvelous content-based course can't do. And that's where I see my role as a teacher, and we should see ourselves as university teachers and universities.
And that's true. I would like to bring those ends a little bit together. And I agree with you, Andrea, that we need to those, let's say, rather softer facts of learning how to learn, or learning how to study, learning how to derive self-motivation on learning new things, and also a self-discipline on keep going when things get complicated. That's, I think, these are our, maybe we can call them the higher order learning goals, right?
Yeah.
And it means that for example, often for bachelor programs, it means pushing people in a positive sense, in terms of getting them going. Whereas on the master's level, very often they have their self-motivation, but they need more guidance in terms of subject guidance in order not to get lost at the wrong point. So and I think I would say I would summarize that as moderation facilities during the guidance through the curriculum, right? And that's something that is being I think it's being valued when experienced. That's what I perceive in my teaching, and we as an organization, for the students that are here, we guide them through our curricula and through their studies, and they perceive that in a positive way when they end at their final destination, at their final certification. But it's hard to perceive if you're not inside the process or inside the organization. So if you just look at the, let's say, product description of a curriculum, and you're not aware that you might get lost in such a new field, then you cannot value that guidance, right? So if you think about this like a labyrinth, then of course it's very valuable if you would have a guide on your side that guides you through the labyrinth. For this one especially, so that you not get lost, but at the same time also develop your strategy on how to go through labyrinths, other ones, on yourself later on, because you won't have that guide forever, right? So we're guiding people just for a limited amount of time, and then they should walk on. They should develop themselves. I think that's our major role, and in order to do that, we need that good content as well, right?
Of course,
so,
yeah.
So we have both aspects, and we need both aspects. And we could make ourselves our life much easier when cooperating with those large content providers, because they could. That's a raw vision and completely out of scope from our workshop a little bit. They are good at providing high quality content for large audiences, and that scales very well, like Barbara said. In the same way, that guidance principle that you put, Andrea, is something that doesn't scale well on a personal level, because it needs one-to-few relations and not one-to-million relations. So there are advantages and disadvantages on both sides, and this could be combined and not competed against each other, right? And I see the future a little bit there. And another important thing that needs to be mentioned, I think, is if we compare classical universities or higher education institutions with those scaling fee-paying organizations, then we treat the programs differently. So we as universities, we treat programs rather as individual events in the different lecturers by different people, whereas the professional providers, they develop course programs rather in a form of a product. And the product might be worked on from different people as well, but in the end, it's what counts is the product and the content, independently whether I did it or Timer did it or Andrea did it, right? And at the university, usually the person is much more in the center, also on content-wise. And we're working on our lectures and have rarely the intensified exchange to other colleagues, even in the same program, right? And for that reason, it might also be not as consistent as the crafted program that is being developed as a holistic thing, right? So and that's something which is perceived by students as well from the content perspective. And I mentioned that because my intention with that scaffolding is also to make those ties, those links visible, in order to get, in the end, people to talk about, I see you also contributing to that learning outcome. What exactly are you doing? And how could we cooperate on that learning outcome for the benefit of that general property that the course program has? If we get this going, then we develop into a closer cooperation also within our lecturers group, but we don't have that yet because those ties, they are invisible, right? Okay, right. Looking at the clock, we're a little bit out of schedule at the moment. So the question is, as I said, I will make that larger. I would have foreseen that in that interactive part, I prepared a Miro board, and I had a link here, which I can, of course, also copy to the chat.
Yeah, please.
In which you would have the opportunity to let me copy the link first, just a second, to reflect with sticky notes on what I said. We had an interesting discussion now already, so I think we can have two options here. Copying of the link doesn't work, of course. Just takes a while. Just a second. Somehow it seems that I cannot copy the link to the chat. No, I can. Okay, now the link is there. So with that link, you should arrive at our Miro board. And in the Miro board, I just had the intention that you reflect on those inputs that I gave you. So I don't know whether everyone is aware of Miro as a collaborative platform. So on the left-hand side, you have a number of tools. Among them, you have the sticky notes. So if I press on such a sticky note, I could take one and draw it to the screen and write something on it. And we can, of course, do all this together. And in this sense, we could reflect on those two questions in terms of how do you structure and specify your lectures or your education programs, and what would you wish for if you could have a wish for that. So that would be my reflective questions. And then, as I introduced you to those VUCA concepts, you could also put some notes there in terms of what's your opinion on those areas. And you're already quite active, which is nice. So we can take some time in order to see what your opinions are. And I think that the discussion that we just had was interesting, or at least interesting to me, because it told me or gave me the impression that we're sharing somehow similar viewpoints and challenges as well. And that there is a pressing need to develop further there. So I will just zoom this a little, that we can read this. And of course, I will keep the Miro boards alive also after the workshop, so that other people can still have a look at it. And let's see what we have here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, I see the mentioning of learning outcomes already several times, which is nice. Mm-hmm. I already see some wishes, updating of teaching materials, for example, using different methods of education. Mm-hmm. Flexibility is another thing that is being mentioned. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Align, very nice, align the course content with the assessment and the learning outcome. So from what I see already here on our reflective question sticky board, I can see that you're already very targeted towards learning outcomes and to relating different things, which is interesting. Do you use any other tools then, or what tools are you using to document your learning outcomes or to relate them to your assessment methods for yourself? Do you write personal notes or using different types of tools?
Are you asking me, Carson, right? I think so. Or in general?
I've heard that you said something, Tamer, but it was quite.
Yeah, this question is for me or for everyone?
It was for everyone, so I was just asking into the round, and maybe we can also do this after we have collected some of the slides. So the how do you grasp or capture the learning outcomes? For example, for myself, when designing a new course, I really start with personal notes and sketches in order to structure content to learning outcomes, and then also to relate it to the assignment. So I do this, I personally at the moment do this very much for myself on my personal notes, and then later try to document that in the course syllabus for the students. So that's my process, which is very low tech at the moment.
I am doing the same. I am drawing like sketches, personal note on the sketches, and this is at the stage of preparing the course. So before preparing the syllabus itself, and then once I start, I try to convert these sketches into content, into teaching material.
Okay, very good. Right. Now let me scroll down to the VUCA area. Whether we have some slides there as well?
We
Not
have
yet.
another section here. Okay.
So the other section was about the VUCA properties. If we want, we can also work here, but I think we have also addressed a couple of issues already in our discussion. So I think some things have been mentioned in our live discussion in and after the break already. So of course you're free to add things here if you want. Also later on, of course. Okay, very interesting. I used the time to read a little bit through your sticky notes, and I see quite a number of interesting things mentioned here, and things that are that need to be addressed and could be addressed. And as a, let's say, common theme or common topic, I see that that focus on the learning and the learning outcome, and also that aspect of interconnecting and structuring things for us as lecturers or program designers, but also towards the students in order to make things more clear and more visible in terms of didactic design, for example, that is also spanning across multiple courses. And there are also interesting wishes there, which relates to the interaction of lecturers of neighboring courses in the same program, for example. And I think that is really beneficial. We do that only occasionally on the coffee corner, but it's usually very beneficial and should be done more systematically in order to have more benefits. I also, I don't have a slide, or I don't have that on one of the slides. One observation that I see in our organization is more and more the collaboration between different course programs in terms of shared lectures or shared modules in which we have students from different course programs in order to provide a higher variety of topics, for example. And this, of course, requires much more collaboration also between the lecturers and those course programs. And in order to enable that interoperability, we have to be much more specific on, for example, requirements when entering that. So that's also something that I would consider a new development for our organization, moving out of the silo of your own course program and opening it up to other course programs within the same organization. That is. All right. Okay. So I think that's quite an interesting collection. With respect to the timing, we are about 4 now. I would suggest that I get back to my second input that I prepared for you today. In which I would like to address those challenges in something that I call pre-built information spaces for learning environments. And we are a little bit behind schedule, so I might streamline that a little bit. All right, so we addressed the challenges, and we also had a nice discussion about this. In previous research projects, we were researching on something that I called, or that we called, pre-built information spaces, and the application was much more in the domain of IT-supported knowledge management. But it applies very much to our field here as well, because as I tried to outline in my first part, the most of our specification is being encoded in documents, and usually only being shared between human users by manual interpretation, and usually not a very strict linking to each other. And those pre-built information spaces, they try to address a similar problem in the knowledge management area in enterprises, where you also have large document collections that have similar concepts and that are not closely related to each other. So we were addressing with the concept collections of unstructured documents, usually text, with an additional structure that contained explicit meaning or semantics that should help to categorize and link those things together. And we were using back in that research work both manual modeling techniques from the semantic technologies field and text mining technologies as well. The interesting part here is that the semantic technologies, which are usually used to express a meaning in what is being called a knowledge representation. So usually, if you want to structure a domain, you build a specific representation for the concepts in that domain, and you connect that to your layer of unstructured information by either linking to that or embedding it in it. And the whole field of semantic technologies is quite wide, and there could be quite simple form of semantic representations that you could think of as a form of metadata that is being added to a document or other kinds of information. And there are very sophisticated forms that are ontology driven and that allow logic reasoning, for example. Now, if we would like to employ that for our learning environments, then I would say we're in a similar situation, that we would like to address or support a collection of unstructured documents which contain usually descriptive information specifications with a structure of concept that has an explicit meaning, and that is usually used for that competence orientation. And as we had in this small conversation with Tamer just recently, how do we develop a new course? We make our notes, our scribbles first, and on those scribbles, we have our concepts and our learning outcomes, and we relate that on our scribbles towards assessment goals and assessment methods. And only then we encode that in a sort of document form like a syllabus. So we start on conceptual level first, but then we encode it into documents only, and we deliver the documents to our students. So the idea is to keep that conceptual level as well, especially with the target towards the learning objectives. And in the mirror board, I've seen that orientation towards learning objectives quite often. So it seems to be that you're thinking along the same line. In the pre-built information spaces for learning environments, I'm focusing very much on those competence models and on the learning objectives specifically. I would like to use a very simple representation in order to make them understand easily. And one of my primary goals is to link those different layers of specifications to each other to make the contributions between those different layers visible, and also then able to use it as a scaffolding and as a discourse object for lecturers to talk about, for example. And in order to keep it simple, I'm also using that, or would like to use that aspect of self-similarity of the representation at the different levels. So using the same structure at the different levels. Now, when we look at the documents currently, then we see that we are having documents at the moment which are at most semi-structured in terms of having some tables with a predefined structure. And that could be supported by semantic technologies, but at the moment is not yet. So when we look at that from different levels, then we have the program level at which we design a program, for example, focusing on competencies, learning objectives, market requirements, and so on. So it's a sort of big picture. And the result is, again, unstructured documents, maybe web pages, and so on. So we do this as a single instance for each program. And normally we have no iterations or long-running iterations there. Then we have this, what I call academic process level, which is running regularly, for example, every semester. And here we have also a number of operational aspects that we're focusing on, like the timing, the resources, who is doing it where and when. And we have a number of artifacts that are resulting in that, appointments, mails in campus systems, syllabi, etc. And then we have the lecturing level for the individual lectures. That would be what I call execution time over a semester. So the individual lecture is focusing on a specific part of content and assessment. It uses didactic methods. And of course, here we have a wide range of things that are being created and that also being specified sometimes. So usually we have that top-down process from the program level towards the lecturing level. And we should also have that lessons learned coming back from the lecturing level to the academic process level, and maybe even to the program level in terms of revision of a program over a certain time. And we're always talking about similar concepts that are related to each other, but that are having a different focus in terms of level of granularity, for example. So the competencies at program level are much more general and much more broad than, for example, the learning objectives that we have at a specific lecturing unit in December this year. Nevertheless, they should be linked to each other, and even a single lecture should contribute to a general learning objective that is being described at program level. But this relation usually is not very visible. Also, when we look at how we specify all those learning outcomes, then there are a number of different ways to do it outside out there. But a well-known framework, for example, is Bloom's taxonomy for that. I'm quite sure that most of you are familiar with that, where we have different forms of learning outcomes that build upon each other, as depicted here on the triangle on the right-hand side. And usually they are codified with a label: remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, or create. And usually with a textual description here on the right-hand side, or with a number of textual descriptions that we encode in a number of verbs that could be used there, as we can see here in this visualization. So a very common approach that, for example, in our university has been, let's say, enforced in a way, was to codify those learning outcomes according to Bloom's taxonomy, using standardized ways to encode those learning outcomes. So that, I think, was very prominently positioned at the last revision of our programs. And of course, it structured all our descriptions of learning outcomes much more. But looking at the result, at least from our revisions, I would question it a little bit whether this structure really was sort of deepening their understanding and providing a better structure. It looks a little bit mechanic, and it is not very detailed, and it's still not connected between the program level and the level more down there. Of course, there are also others, other assessments or taxonomies out there. I've just included one more here on the slide deck, the depth of knowledge model, which is taking a little bit different view, but again is addressing a number of different levels in order to qualify a certain learning objective according to a level, let's say, generally. And looking at a number of those levels led me to come to the conclusion that usually when we look at CVs, that's where I came across the idea, then we see something like this skill matrix here on the right-hand side, where we usually have a visual representation, a very, let's say, fuzzy representation of some skills. And they can have different forms, but very often they are built around a number of concepts and a level of or a degree of expertise, right? And they are easy to understand. So that picture somehow stuck to me, and I thought, well, why not taking those types of visualizations and relate them to taxonomies like Bloom's taxonomy in order to generate a structurally similar approach for specifying learning outcomes and linking those outcomes to each other. So combining those competency matrices, as I called them, as a common structure with the Bloom taxonomy. And in this way, I could generate the learning outcomes in a uniform way. We're doing this already with these standardized module descriptions, but we could also, of course, also do that in a more visualized way. The important part here would be to link those things together, which then leads to the aspect of hierarchical competence matrices, which I will introduce in a second. When thinking about that and talking about that with colleagues, then these competencies matrices raised interesting discussions often, and arguments where they're easy to grasp because they're visually represented, and others said, well, they're very hard to understand because it's not clear what's behind a certain level, for example. So the combination of the competency matrix with a well known taxonomy might be a way to express this meaning in a more meaningful way. And then I thought, well, what about linking those different levels to each other to make the contribution clear between the more abstract levels of competencies to the more specific ones in a lecture unit, for example. And that led me to the concept of hierarchical concept matrices, which is building on that simple approach of CMs, but connecting them in a hierarchical way. So we would say that at the topmost level, we have a certain competency that we would like to develop, and we specify that at program level. That's C2 here. Then, of course, C2 is being educated by a number of modules, and maybe the module would be this one here at the second level, which contains a number of different specific competencies that are contributing all to C2. So that would be C2.1, C2.2, and C2.3. All of these three might be in those module and contributing to that topmost level. And of course, there could be also other modules contributing to C2. So that would be on a module or lecturing level. And then we could go even further and say, okay, there might be a certain lecture that is going into more detail and contributing with the C231 and C232 to that competency that I named C23. So in this way, I'm showing here 3 levels, but of course there could be more, and there could be also more modules contributing to one competency. But I hope that you get the general idea that we do not develop isolated competency matrices, but instead also link them to each other in terms of contribution with those green arrows as depicted here in that schematic thing. And of course, we could do this from a top-down module. So we start with the module, then we go to the lecture series, and then to the individual lecture. And in this way, we would get a hierarchy of that. What's the benefit of that? Well, first of all, that would lead to a consistent backbone structure, as I would like to call it, over all the levels. So for the first time, I could see, starting from the top, where it ends up at the bottom, or I could also start at the bottom and travel up all the hierarchy to see where a specific learning outcome contributes or should contribute to. So that was something that was invisible or is invisible in, let's say, all our previous specification approaches, at least the ones that we used here in Kufstein. And I reasoned that it supports both the modeling and the execution. So for program designers, for example, they can see the trace from the top level qualifications in the program to the learning outcomes of the individual lecture. So they could trace that down to the very last part. I realized that I've actually done this once when I was designing a program, and the quality management demanded from me as a program designer that I need to make clear which lecture is contributing to which qualification goal, that I built such a matrix years ago, right? And that was perceived very positively by the quality management, because they've seen that explicit connection. That is what is meant here. That's the benefit for the program designers. And lecturers, which usually focus on their individual lecture and their learning outcomes, they could see the greater context of their lecture and the contributions to the education programs, and maybe also to or from other modules. So that might also get the discussion going among lecturers that are related to each other in terms of contribution to the same module or to the same learning objective. We have that demand, or the lack of that awareness, very often between internal lecturers and external lecturers, right? Which have very different viewpoints on that. And then, of course, if you have that, then you can also have all sorts of checks in place. So you could check for consistency of that backbone structure. Is there any qualification objective that is not being covered sufficiently by learning outcomes from a lecture? Is it plausible to do it this way? Maybe there are some imbalances in terms of learning goals being pursued in several modules without the need to do that, and so on. So making the structure visible also provides a lot of opportunities for improving the structure later on. But first we have to make it invisible. So that's one thing. Second thing is that my personal observation on using such a concept for my own lectures at the moment, I have to prepare a lot of new materials for new lectures, is that it's not that easy, of course, right? So moving from those rather unstructured or, let's say, isolated descriptions to a more structured form requires to overcome some inertia. We do it the way we always did it, in a way, yeah? So when under time pressure, I kept falling back to my old habits there. So I'm not really there yet, although I see the benefit of it. Then the second thing is if you do have the material already, then that might not really be helpful because you need to convert and reshape it, which is an additional effort, especially if you make learning outcomes more explicit than they have been. So this thinking in a connected way from a lecture unit to a program and back is also a challenge. I would call it a process over time. So for new lectures, you might have the chance to start on a blank page, but if under time pressure, like me, for example, that is also not so easy to do. So what's my reasoning about that? Is it useful at all? And I think a good approach would be just to get started small and experimental, and then get along or improve it and increase it as you get along with reshaping existing content. From my very current experience in the last 2 semesters of doing all these new courses, I would also start with the reshaping of existing content when trying this out first, because that already had these iterations where you know what works and what doesn't work, which is not the case for new courses or new content in general. So you can see that I am positive, but I'm also let's say not skeptical, but cautious about the implications of using such a model. I would briefly like to sketch on how we could implement such an supporting software system to do that not only on paper, but of course we can also work with the concept as it is now. So this is rather, let's say, as I said, a road of the next steps that I'm going to do in order to provide an ICT support. But I see the challenge already, as I tried to explain on the previous slide, I see the challenge already on the level of taking the concept into action. So if we look into the literature, then of course we can see that this has been tried before. So there is this one work of Chang, for example, who tried to do a layered approach with semantic concepts quite some time ago, and they built a system covering different levels of abstraction. And their intention was to provide a personalization for the assessment of student work. And in this case, they built a semantic structure, an ontology, and they built a system around that completely in order to fulfill that purpose. Unfortunately, none of that is left, so the knowledge structure is not available publicly at least, and also there is no system there. So I would say it was an approach that is quite that was quite massive, but it's not reusable now or for us as outsiders. And a similar approach was done in this work here by Meister and her colleagues, and they proposed a knowledge graph-based information management system that should drive the whole planning phase of an academic planning. So they developed an ontology for all sorts of aspects in the university, and then they implemented that in an IT system in order to drive that. Again, the approach of building a new system to manage academic content in a different way than it's being done currently. And then, of course, there are also aspects in which only the knowledge structure has been developed. Here, for example, we see a snapshot of an ontology that was trying to address the Bloom's taxonomy in a goals ontology that could be used for a number of purposes. Here they implemented it in schools, for example. This ontology is available, so it could be reused here. Now, these have been just a number of approaches, mostly from the research field, but when I reason on, okay, where is this relevant in my work, then I can say, well, none of this is actually visible in my work as lecturer or my work as a course designer currently, right? So there are no real productive systems that I could use for that. Why is that the case? And my reasoning was the following. One thing is that very often those systems, those research projects were focusing on, we built a new system for that. So that doesn't really work, because in most of our organizations, we do have already systems in place, different systems, of course, and they are productive. They have to be used. So building completely new systems might not be such a good approach. The second thing, when I was looking at those knowledge representations, I found that they tried to model the whole universe of a higher education institution, which at the same time is not really necessary in most cases. And finally, all of those concepts, they are not really easy to use, because they require a very good understanding of tools and methods, and sometimes even of ontologies. So when thinking about these concepts of clarity and agility in mind, I had the idea that it should be much more lightweight and focused on a single point that is important. And very often we have a situation like that, that our lecturers, they're working usually without any knowledge on knowledge modeling or something like that. They have they have some core concepts in mind, like the orientation on learning outcomes, on assessment methods, and so on, and on their subjects that they deal with. But it should be something that they can use, which is independently from all the systems that might be in place in one university. Also, that observation that things are being encoded in documents was something that I had in mind. So I propose, or I'm working on, not proposing, I'm working on a two-step approach. So one step is that I said I would like to stick on the idea of having a document in order to describe your specification of a program, of a curriculum, of an individual lecture, or of a lecture unit. And that document should be self-contained. It should just contain the content that it always contains, unstructured text, and it should contain the semantic information to that. It should be independent of any tool, and it should also work without any other system. So it would be enough to use a browser to edit the document, for example. And you can send it back and forth between different people. And the knowledge representation should be easy and should be predefined. So you don't need to be a knowledge designer with that. So it's the document-based approach. You could just remind them or think about it as documents that contain semantic information, mostly about the things that you also mentioned in the interactive part, mostly about learning outcomes. And then, of course, you had only information that is being codified for that lecture or for that lecture unit. You do not have any aggregated point of view, and I will come to that in a second. If you'd like to compare this approach, what I call the semantic specification documents or SSDs, if you could compare that with things that you know, then you could, for example, take a digital photo. That photo usually is also being augmented with metadata that is relevant to describe the photo. It could be resolution parts, it could be maybe a geographical location and sometimes a description. And it's attached to the photo itself, so it travels with the photo. Now, that was step one. Step two is, well, if I would like to have a more overview on those structures, for example, on descriptions of a couple of those module descriptions and the links between them, then of course the individual document wouldn't help. I need somehow to collect them and to extract something out of that. And that would be done by the aggregation of documents. So you just put them on a pile. Then you have some automated analysis process that sucks the semantic information out of it, relates it to each other, and stores it in a form that it can be queried later on. And that's what I would call then such a pre-built information space supporting these higher education institutions. And you've also seen similar things like that, because if you take a lot of pictures and put them all on Flickr, then you can search for aggregated features of those photos. You can say, I want only photos that relate to a city. I only want to have red photos, for example. So it also exploits the metadata, but provides a more aggregated view on your whole collection. In a similar way, you can think of a repository of those semantic specification documents as providing an overview and a linked overview of all those documents that you have to specify your learning outcomes. So that's the two-step approach for that. And what I will use for that is a number of technologies, and I called this 2 or 3 slides that I have on that just implementation notes. I don't really would like to go into technical details here, but just would like to give you an idea on how this could be realized, because I'm building on existing technologies. I'm not reinventing the wheel here, but using things that are already there. One thing is the technologies that are being evolved for the semantic web, which was supposed to be, or is supposed to be, an extension of the current web with the intention to provide information in a way that is more structured, and for that reason also enabling computers to analyze the content in a more structured and more explicit way in order to provide information on that. A big example of that is, for example, the DBpedia database, which is the same content like in the Wikipedia that you probably know, but in a more structured way, enabling you to answer questions like on a database with the content that comes from the Wikipedia that is much more unstructured by nature. So I will build on those technologies and the knowledge representations that can be found there. Today, those things are often called linked data or knowledge graphs, which puts the emphasis very much on the aspect of having concepts that are being linked to each other and that could be navigated using those links. And that's, I think, an interesting idea to take with you because that is also my attention of those hierarchical concept matrices. I would like to model individual learning outcomes in competency matrices. And then I would like to link them to each other in terms of their contribution to each other. And that, of course, creates a small linked graph that makes relations visible that are not visible before. If I take the concept of linked data or knowledge graphs for our purpose, I would say it is an explicit and formal representation of what we would like to achieve here, also with our concept matrices, so that's okay. We would like to accumulate that in a data store that can be queried. That's the second step, so that's okay as well. And then, of course, you can go further than that, and you could provide generalizations of common concepts using ontologies. That's something that I do not target yet, because I think the first aspect would be to provide those structures and those backbone functionalities. And from that on, we could go to generalizations, but not earlier. And I said that I would like to implement that in the documents themselves. And also here, I would like to build on an existing format for semantic representation that's called microformats. And you might not have heard about that ever, but you might have used that anyway. Microformats are a way to provide or to include that semantic information in a normal website. And that's been done quite often. And I just put an example here, which is a restaurant and hotel here in Kufstein, a normal website, what you can see there in the background. And if you use a specific tool for that, that looks for that semantic microformat content, then it comes up with that representation or that result list here. And it says there are a number of structured informations that I can find here on that website, something about local businesses. These are all the core information on that hotel. Some articles can be found here. These are blog style articles that are found here as well. And then, interestingly, it also reports about structured data in terms of events that are being encoded here on the website for human users, but also for machines. And here on the right-hand side, you have the Google search result on that hotel. And you can see that apart from the normal title and abstract, you also find these three items here in which you will find the same events like you had here in the events section. And this is also, you could go into the details here. This is a structured piece of information that has been encoded on the website, but is not visible there in that encoded form. So microformats help to structure content in a way that it is machine readable and human readable as well. So that's a similar form like I would like to encode the semantic information of the microformats to be used. Now, let's say that's the way of implementation that I would like to go. And it's enough if you keep in mind that I'm building on existing technologies. And finally, I would like to point your attention to things that look a little bit outward of our higher organization institution, because it's not only about our programs per se, but it's also about other aspects. For example, about the interfacing challenge, as I call it here. And one thing that is a big discussion in our organization currently is the aspect of recognition of prior learning. So the anticipation of formal learning and informal competencies when future students would like to enroll for the program. So that's something that is becoming more important, also due to some regulations. It's important on the interface between a bachelor and a master's program, and also the recognition of informal competencies from job experiences, for example, have to be matched here as well. And that's quite a hard job to do for the program managers, because they have usually to analyze informal documents or unstructured documents. And very often there's a lot of guesswork here. This becomes more structured, I guess, in the next years. And of course, it's also something that we could support in providing more structured information on our bachelor programs to make it easier for the program managers of master programs to understand what our students really can do and cannot do in this way. So prior learning is one of the things where also structuring of learning outcomes on the program level really might help to address the interfacing challenge. And the second part is also, if you look at the enterprise setting, and we had this in the discussion already, then for HR departments, it's also more important to understand how the competencies of an applicant are to be considered. And I think there will be more education components in the CVs due to the lifelong learning. There will be more fragmentation of skill sets among very different education formats from different organizations. We had that already in the discussion. And the documentation of those results will be more detailed in the future. We see that already with the transcript of records and similar things. And for HR departments, it would be very good to have a more unified view on those skill sets, which is at the moment a very manual work to be done. So that would be interesting too. And finally, we would also have the aspect of bringing that to a new level in terms of how do we certify things, learning outcomes in a way that it can be trusted. And with that respect, I'm not sure whether you're aware of that. There are a lot of movements which are quite interesting and promising for the future. Also in unifying the view on very different forms of education. And one part we have from the European Union, this Europass digital credentials infrastructure, which is a long word for a one-way stop to certify learning outcomes on program level for higher education institutions, but also now for other forms of educations, for example, for skills worker and so on. And that's been done on European level. So that's very interesting interesting road to follow if you want to certify your learning outcomes in a way that it could be understood in any of the countries of Europe, which is quite different from country to country. So that's let's say slow moving but interesting way of documenting and certifying in the end, digitally certifying a certain learning outcome or a certain competence or set of competences. And it all started with a standardized form of CVs there, but it moved way beyond that already. So that's one thing that's interesting in terms of trustworthy body. And the second thing that is quite interesting is that in the domain of semantic technologies, there is a standard that is being evolved from the standardization body for many of the web standards, which is the W3C organization. And they have built a data model, a semantic data model, which is being used for expressing semantically how credentials could be modeled. So it's the verifiable credentials data model, nothing that you need to memorize, but keep in mind that there's already an interoperable data structure for talking about credentials, and these two are also working together. So we have a way on expressing credentials of different forms in a unified way, technically. That's what the W3C does. And we have a large organizational body that is trying to to provide a uniform way of building and certifying credentials in the long run. So I expect that there's going to be interesting evolvements here that go beyond the individual higher education institution. All right. With that, I would like to conclude my input here on those pre-built information spaces. Quite a lot of input. I'm aware of that, and the intention here being that that I would like to share with you the idea of starting small in terms of focusing on learning outcomes, providing a simple way of modeling and representing and visualizing those learning outcomes based on existing models like the Bloom taxonomy, but connecting them over the different levels in order to provide a more backbone-like and connected structure for learning outcomes that could be used as a tool, as a structure to get the discussion going on which concepts are related to each other and which concepts are contributing in terms of learning outcomes. And that, of course, can be done or can be supported in a technology part, but we can also do this on with pen and paper, or we can do this in a Miro board, which would be the intention of the next section. And this will, maybe I switch that further. This will look like that. So I prepared a Miro board again for all of you, in which I have set up a structure that is similar to what I've shown you in terms of those conceptual competency matrices that are linked to each other using 3 of those hierarchies. And if you want, you could try it out for your own lectures or for your own programs in order to get a feeling for it and get the discussion going on the usefulness of that concept. But before we do that, I might switch back and ask whether there are any questions or comments on what I shared with you up to now.
Actually, I had a comment, but you answered it while you are going about the technical part. If you would like to, if there is software that can support something like this, you already shared some, and you conclude that some of them are not working because they are not existing anymore, or some of them are working but not exactly towards the same target, but we can explore it a bit.
Yeah.
I have a question regarding to the flexibility of the course. So now I can see from what you presented, we link everything. We link the lecture, the individual lecture, to the goals somehow of the course, and then the goals of the program itself. Like 3 level, if we think about 3 level, the program, the course, and then the lecture. But during the discussion, you reflect a bit about this flexibility, like, we need to change something because of new knowledge, for example. How this fit with this structure? How this will help us to be more flexible in our lectures?
Okay. I think that the structures that I have presented and that I have in mind, they are very dynamic. So the only difference, so to say, that we have then that we have using those structures into what we do currently is we make those relations more explicit and more visible. So for example, if new knowledge is coming up, let's say you have an existing structure and you have that backbone of connected learning objectives from the highest level to the lowest level. Now a new topic comes the way, right? And the question is, okay, we should incorporate that. Then we would ask ourselves, okay, where should we fit that in? And we could then arrive at different conclusions. We could say, okay, we need a new model for we need a new module for that. And in this new module, we would have new learning objectives and so on. And then we would, let's say we have that first step isolated, new module, new learning objectives. But since we have that connected model, we would automatically ask the question, okay, where does the learning objective of that module contribute to, right? And that would then, it would stimulate question on, okay, maybe we have to extend the qualification, the list of qualification properties that we've specified for that program, right? And maybe then someone else would say, but there are already 10 primary qualification lists. It need not be more than 10. So we have to think about, okay, which of those existing 10 could be omitted to fit the new topic in. And in this way, you would have a discussion on how, for a new topic, how to fit the new topic in and where to fit it in. It could, for example, also be something where I say, okay, this topic, this new topic is something that would fit nicely into an existing module, and we would just add another learning objective there, right? And the structure that I propose does not limit you in terms of new topics
new
or
knowledge,
new modules or whatever. The only thing that it provides now is it makes it much more visible that there is a need to fit in the new knowledge somewhere, right? And to connect the two others. Because it would automatically look strange if there's a new module, but it doesn't contribute to any of the primary objectives of the course program. But that's exactly what sometimes happens if programs evolve over time and a new topic is coming along. Okay, you make a new lecture on that, but you forget to tie it to others, right?
Yeah, I can see the point. I think that the time is run fast, but I think now we are linking the module, or which is the last end, the smallest component, to the higher level objective or things like this. But between the modules themselves, there is no link.
Between
right?
the modules, what do you mean?
I mean between the lower end component of the course, the lectures, for example.
Aha, okay. So in this current view here, I'll make it a little bit larger. I would say that here that we have a competency matrix at the program level. So this would be the qualification profiles, as we call them in Kufstein, for example. That is what is on the program folder, right? So you have a number of them. It could be, of course, more than 3. And you would link them down to a number of modules or lecturers, depending on how your course is structured. So this would be, for example, a lecture, or it could be also more than one, right? And then, of course, you have individual lecture units. So, for example, I don't know, the weekly lectures that belong to that series. And there you could also have, on a very operational level, different learning outcomes. For example, in my courses, I try to have always a first slide on every, I don't know, unit that I do. What are the learning outcomes, the takeaways from this 90 minutes lecture? And that, of course, is very specific, but it always pays to the module, right? And I do that, for example, in order to equip my students with a list of items that they have to prepare if there's the final exam at the end. Then I always set them, and they ask me for the preparation of the exam, what should I learn? Then I say, look at all the learning objectives that I put in the individual lectures. They always have the same structure, and that represents the body of possible topics and questions that are derived from that, right? And here in this visualization, I have a strict hierarchy. But of course, it also could be it probably will always be a hierarchy, but it will not necessarily be just one path. It could be also that, or it will be that for the high level competencies on a program level, there will be a number of modules that contribute to an individual objective, right? So here it will be probably more than one. And similar, the story could go also for other parts. So it could be that the different lecturers are contributing to a general skill. And I give you an example. I'm teaching, for example, software development, right? And we have software development in our bachelor's program, for example. We have that in a number of courses. And our didactic framework is like that. We start with the very basics, and then we try to educate our students more and more towards that core topic of software development in our case. And we do that on 2 levels. One level is the teaching about the programming concepts per se, which are universal. And the second part is the programming on specific platforms. So for example, in the 3rd semester, I'm currently lecturing to my students on the level of mobile applications on Android devices. And in this lecture, I am teaching my students how to program a smartphone, of course, an Android smartphone. But at the same time, I'm also teaching my students some new concepts of software development that are being used in that environment. So they have 2 levels. And that, of course, contributes to 2 different learning objectives on the higher qualification level. Namely, the one that they can develop software with advanced software development patterns, and that qualification is being fed by a number of lectures. And then another qualification is that they can provide, that they can program or that they can develop software for mobile platforms. And that's another qualification that is being fed only by the lecture that I was just referring to in the third semester, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, and in this way, the contribution can be more more complicated than on this picture here. But nevertheless, the important part is that everything is linked to each other. So you could pick any learning objective and see where it is being drilled down further on the details level, or where it accumulates to on the qualifications level.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. All right. Are there other questions? Doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, so didn't find where to click. So where's the camera? It just disappeared. Okay. One note I made. You talked about the different sorts or types of qualification and how to recognize it, that it will be an issue in the future at university level and at general level. For example, if you apply for a job, how does a company acknowledge what you've done before on a formal and informal level? And I think particularly at the university level, that will be very, very difficult, because I had to think of the very beginnings of Bologna. I think that were the first steps into trying to unify the whole thing, because every country had its own educational system and the way people graduated and what was expected, the qualifications. And in this way, I think the European credit transfer system is at least a try to make it comparable. And that, I think, or I experienced, is really a big job to do. It's not easy. And when you talk about also referring to those informal competencies or competencies you acquired, not at university, but because of you done a great job before, and or you've done some other sort of certification, how to acknowledge that within university level, I think, well, I'm happy in about 10 or 15 years, I hopefully still get money from, some pension scheme or whatever. But I think that's really a huge, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and that will be really difficult to do. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I'm on your side in terms of that will be very difficult on an European level, also due to the fact that that there is so much diversity in our education systems and the grading systems and the levels of expectations and all of that, and that still will remain to be a challenge. The reason why I mentioned that here is twofold. So one thing is that we are already moving towards that direction in, for example, with the transcript of records and so on. So we're trying to elaborate already what is being told and so on. And this is done very much on the informal level again. So again, we're writing text on what has been told in the transcript of records. And very often it's, in our case, it's a copy of what is the learning outcome from the module, right? So
exactly how it is done currently.
Yeah, so that's not really very helpful, right? But it could be evolved a little bit further. So if we imagine that we would have this backbone structure that I was talking about, then we could really provide a much more detailed description on what is being told, because we can go from the module level down to the lecture level if we want, right? Because we have that interlinked structure later, right? Not yet. So this would provide a deeper insight what the student at a certain year has done in his or her studies, which might be something different that another student has done in other years, because things are evolving. But we could provide the student with that detailed information automatically, because we have it automatically when we use those structures or when we've implemented those structures. And that's one thing of the benefits that I can see there. The second thing is I expect that there will be other forms of assessments available to qualify knowledge that you claim to have. And I give you a specific example. When you are on a platform like LinkedIn, for example, then you can also specify your skills or expertise. And recently, LinkedIn has started to provide assessments for expertise. So if you say, I am an expertise in the software programming language Java, for example, then the portal will suggest to you that you qualify your claimed Java expertise with a small test. And if you take the test, yeah, then
qualified.
And get or succeed with the test, then this assessment will be added to your expertise, and the expertise will said verified by LinkedIn, right? So I'm not favoring that, or I'm not advertising LinkedIn functionalities, but I would like to highlight the let's say the mechanism, right? That you might also claim that you have a certain expertise, but there might be other ways of proving it. And as these professional providers gets more and more common, I might be willing to pay for a certification in order to get that expertise not only listed, but also certified, right?
Is that already done?
That's already done, yeah.
Okay, so, because some time ago, I also joined LinkedIn. And then, of course, you check. Okay, so that's what we all do. Yeah, so like Googling people. Yeah, you check on colleagues, on other people in your field. Yeah, so and then you check, and then you see colleague qualified for this, that, perfect. Yeah, best lecturer ever. And then you have people to, well, as you say, prove it, or references, yeah? And then you see, okay, first one, husband's best friend, colleague, student, colleague, all people you know, and you've a bunch of people kind of proving that you are an expert in this area, but it's all family and best friends and colleagues. So that's nothing. Yeah, I can't deal with that. And that was really a point when I said, well, I left or canceled my account in a way, because I thought, no, that's not the way LinkedIn should be used. And of course, many people do that. And if now there's really a way, and if they do it, like really, you have a chance to prove that you're really an expert and that you really can do this or that, or good at this and that, I think that's a good idea, because just referring to people who can prove that you're an expert, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, but it's very nice that you mentioned that, Andrea. The referencing of people as being qualified for something, because that would have been the next thing that I would have mentioned if you hadn't mentioned it already.
Okay.
As a way of qualification. And of course, as you explained, there are also references which are misused, right? But
Of course,
at the
yeah.
same time, that's also a primary form of providing reference in terms of professional reference. So, for example, as a professor, I'm sometimes asked by current students or also by alumni to provide a reference letter or a reference on certain qualifications for whatever, for a job, for an internship or whatever, right? And I choose whether I provide a reference or not from my role. And usually what I do is I write a document and I send it to the student, and he or she uses it wherever or for whatever purpose it's been used. But of course, this could also be a reference that is more visible. And for some aspects, I might be competent of providing references, for example, for the students that I've taught during their studies, right? So this part of references is also quite invisible, but it could be made more visible, and that's already common business. So if you apply for a job, sometimes you also will reference people that you have worked with, for example, and that you will also inform, you might, that you will ask for, can I name you as a reference for this and that job, for example, right? So this type of certifying certain qualifications by referencing competent people is something that I also expect to increase in the future. And also here again, we can make things more explicit, and there will be always people who I would provide a reference, or who I would not provide a reference, who I would assert a certain competence, and others who I wouldn't, right? So it's that would be something to deal with, those informal questions, because as you said in your very nice example, you are looking at the persons who gave the reference and you come to a conclusion whether this is worthwhile or not, right?
Exactly, yeah. Okay, but making that more transparent of who gives that assessment, in a way, who is saying, well, you're good at your job and you're an expert in your field, making it transparent. So am I a former employer? Am I don't know, the head of the degree program she's teaching for, or whatever, then it's transparent, yeah? So I think the problem then is it isn't transparent to people, of course, who don't know the people involved, yeah? So for others, of course, it appears like, okay, interesting, must be good, maybe asking her for some I don't know, conference opening speech or whatever, but sometimes a bit strange to me. So yeah. But what you said, making it more transparent, and that's what the final thing I would like to say for today is, what I liked about your idea is I do not care really about technical implications, because I'm not I'm not in IT or whatever. But you made me more aware of what I'm already trying to do. That's really that structure, that hierarchical structure, because when you were talking, I thought of, okay, competence-based, yeah, I fully agree. I try to teach competent-based. But then I thought, okay, when I think of the lectures I have to do, there are so many competencies involved. It's not only language competencies, it's social competencies. I need the competence to kind of distinguish between formal, informal, the competence of what is polite, what is impolite, apart from the language phrases, of course, which is always also a competence to know the phrases. And that's also what I would like to, well, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Tamer, how is it? Tamer, yeah? Yes, what he said, the way it is interconnected, you said the last, in a way, when we take it top down, the last things or units are not interrelated, or how do they relate to the whole? I think it's a nice try to relate everything, and it relates to some things anyway. But as you said, it's not always that clear. But to give a very example from language competences, when you have a lecture and it was decided one of your key competencies you have to teach is being able to socialize, yeah? Which, of course, here we have the level of ambiguity, or what else could we take? Because it's not quite clear to me, for example, in what way does it relate to the rest of the course program that it is said, teaching socializing? Of course, it's an important skill, but it doesn't say in which situation. So I have a kind of restricted time with my students, yeah, where I can try to help them acquire some competencies. So I decide, okay, what might be important? Socializing at conferences. So that is one of my main issues, where I say socializing at official situations like conferences or an education fair or whatever, that is one competence. And then I see, okay, for this competence, being able to socialize at conference, yeah, then I need, again, competencies, like I need the language structures, like functional structures to use. It's one competence. Then the social competencies, of course, you need at a conference, and this implies, of course, levels of formality, being formal, being informal, level of politeness, and so on. So that would be the next level. And the last level then, of course, is how can I try to convey, yeah, or trying to be a guide to help them acquire the competencies. So you need the specific language, of course, yeah. How do I greet people? How do I introduce people, and so on? How do I say where I come from, what I do? So these are the last steps. And in a way, of course, when you take this, sometimes it seems that they are not interrelated, but all in all, it's an important part of being able to use a foreign language, which is a general aspect of the whole course. So in a way, it is related to me, but not always that obvious. And that's what I liked about it, trying for myself to make the structures I use more clear. Yeah, they should be more clearly, and I will really try to do this with my lectures. Like, what do I decide on? Because I write after this unit, I can understand this and that. I can use these phrases. I can take part in discussions on science and technology and so on. So I have the outcomes. But really, the big picture, like what is the special competence, and then in a way the sub-competencies, and then really we are going to the contents and how to do it and the methodologies and so on, really trying to do it for me to make that more clear, and then I can also present it to the students, and then they will understand it more clearly. And that's what I like. That's what I've taken with me with this afternoon, and I like that, because the technical part I don't care. I really have to say, but the idea is great. I like it.
Very good. So I'm glad that you take away something, and also thank you for your comment, because it's a very good observation that making things more explicit and linking it to other higher level concepts has a number of advantages. It has the advantage that it becomes more clear for yourself. So you might get aware of things that you knew before, but that haven't been so explicitly aware for yourself. That's one thing. Second thing, it helps to provide an understanding for the students on what is the intention, the objective of all of this. Yeah, and I think that was also mentioned on the interactive session on the board with one sticky. And the third thing that is also relevant is it makes competencies visible also to other colleagues in the program that might look for some way to educate on socializing. That was your example, right? Maybe that's not yet a primary objective of that program, but it could be, yeah? Or it could be a contribution on some other parts. So it becomes also visible that what you do in your lecture or in your lectures or topics might also have contributions in other areas, in other fields, which were not recognized yet, right? So making it visible also starts the interaction or discussion on where there are loose ends, that's how I would put it, that haven't been taken into account yet. And I think that's the case for all of our domains, right? And connecting those things generates opportunities in the end, right?
And what you said is, as it is documented, maybe some people feel more obliged, maybe, to see the links or find links to other lectures, because I always try to do some sort of, well, in your lecture, you do this and that. I'm asked to do basic language for technical description of technical stuff, processes, or whatever. You have a lecture where you talk about different metals, materials, forces, and what are materials used for, what qualities they have. I have to do that in English, and I suggested, well, when you do this unit, wouldn't it be a nice idea to do it in English? Because then they see why they need it. Oh, I never liked English. I don't do that.
Yeah. So it's that
problems we have to face every day. Yeah. But making it aware and maybe then really asking, as the head of the program, how could you link your lecture more precisely to another lecture? Maybe then there would be more effort put into it to come up with those links and seeing that everything is interrelated and that structure, and then coming up with the big picture. That would be a great idea. Love the idea.
Very good. Thank you, Andrea. So I think that's sort of a good, let's say, conclusionary part. So as I said, and as I have it on, there's a question from Franz. Okay, yeah, Franz. Franz, you go first.
Hello, good evening. I've seen this hierarchy, and I just thinking of how do you write down individual competencies, especially in the field of the bachelor thesis, where every student has another domain which he's working on and so is this model also suitable for such an individual competency, or is this beyond the scope?
I've never thought about that. I think that would be so the lowest level that I considered so far was the level of the individual lecturer. So for the final thesis, it would be probably just the description of the lecture when the thesis is being put in. But of course, the individual topics, they are very they are individual. So one thing that I've never thought about that, but one thing that I could think of would be that when we coach our students and supervise our students in the thesis, we always, or I always try to supervise them on two levels. One is the methodology level. Which methodologies are they working on to do their thesis? So are they working with an experiment or doing quantitative interviews or whatever, the methodology part? And the other one is what topic are they dealing with? Are they dealing with, I don't know, mobile technologies? So these are the two areas. And what I could think of would be a sort of competence matrix along those two dimensions. So you could say, okay, as a result of the thesis, you have acquired a certain expertise or competence in one domain, let's say mobile devices, and you are an expert in quantitative interviews because you have done a huge quantitative interview study. So it could be an individualized competence matrix that could be linked to that individual thesis, or maybe also to the report that you write in the end. So when we are writing a sort of structured report on the final thesis, and we could add such a competence matrix there. Okay. So that would be a very individual and ad hoc way to do it.
But one thing, I don't think that it's that individual, because in a way we are all training students to write the bachelor thesis in the end. So as far as our program is concerned, in the very first semester, you are taught how to work scientifically, how to write a paper. You have to do that during your studies. And then the bachelor thesis, it's what you said, the two levels. One competence is actually to write a structured scientific paper, to understand technical concepts, yeah, to assess concepts and so on. So I think the only thing is actually the content, the topic, yeah, that might be different, but all the things around it, like dealing with methodologies and how to really start working on a scientific paper, to have an outline, how to write it, and all the things actually you've acquired within your studies. So the content is only one thing, and of course it's great if you acquire new knowledge, yeah, but in a way you have been trained. When you do your bachelor, you have been trained, yeah, in a way 3 years to be able to write such a paper. Mm-hmm. So it's all competencies you've acquired, and your maybe personal competence now is the very special topic where you say, well, there's one issue and I would like to take a specific look at this or that, and that's maybe then the aim of my paper, or the content part, yeah. But all things around it has to do with academic education, so it has already been part of the curriculum, it's part of the whole. For me,
that's true. I agree with you, but it might be that, for example, for your master thesis, you do a quantitative analysis that goes beyond what you've done in the rest of your master education before. And for that reason, you have deepened your knowledge to a higher extent, I would say, than someone else who is working with a qualitative method, for example.
But
right?
that's the difference then, the different levels, where you say at the level of a master program, you have specific requirements or learning goals, what you should be able to do. So that's the levels then of what are you, or should you be able to do at the bachelor level, as an undergraduate student, what should you be able to do at the graduate level? That's
okay.
That's the way I see it. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I see.
Looking at the watch or at my watch, I'm directly at 5:30.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Tamer, you need to cut me off now.
Yeah. Actually, I told you before we start that it's very interesting topic, and I really expected that it will last maybe until 6. Maybe if we leave ourselves, the discussion will go on. So I hope we will stop now, simply because it's 2 days workshop again. We have another day in spring when we put all the knowledge that we got today in action, in real action. Maybe I will reflect something, because actually I didn't introduce the project that we are working underneath it, and this is actually linked to Andrea comment, and Alexandra is here now. To Andrea comment that our institutes need to move more toward skilled our students to be more facing the challenge around our society. And this is what we are doing in this project. Our project is called Cloud Earth Eye, and we are working with different level. The top level is what we have now. It's academic level, like invite professor who has deep knowledge in subtopics, and then we come together in a discussion. Then we have another level at the student level. We teach students courses that outside our universities. We are focusing on big data, artificial intelligence, how we can use these tools in order to understand our environment in general. And we have attached to this teaching program to the students, we have acceleration program, where we try to choose the good students in order to support them to polish their idea to be good green business idea. And if the students succeed to establish their company, they can go to our business partner, because we have in this project a business partner who can help them to accelerate them for 2 months to be good business. So we try to give this model that Andrea asked for during the discussion, that we need to have like different approach from different angles in order to make or strengthen the role of universities. So this is the Cloud Earth Eye. This is our.
The next part is going to be too technical, because yeah.
No, it didn't. So
No. Promise.
I would like to do that.
Yeah. So sorry, I just lost the connection for a minute. Yeah. But really, I really would like to thank all of you for this interesting discussion. I would like to invite you actually for contribution for a special issue. But because of the time now, I can see that we are run over the time, so I will send an email to you just once we finish. Just give me 1 hour or so, and I will send you an email for the invitation for this special issue, which is tackle things related to education and how we can design new education programs that fit or can help us to solve some challenge that we have. Yep.
Can you also send a link to the project you've talked about, the Cloud Earth?
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Because I'm interested, so that I can find some more information. And
of course, and you know, we are very happy to have contribution from all of you. So this is actually, I would like to use this session, Carson, like, you know, like introduction session for the project to you, in order to have you contribute to the project. So definitely,
well,
I will send. Of course,
so
of course.
At least
I will send you an email with the invitation and with the website for the project. Yes, I will do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
And finally, I
Okay,
would
very
like to
much.
thank you, Carson, for this very interesting workshop. And we looking forward for the coming one in spring. And we will try to find a way in order to give some time for it. You know,
Okay, I can also
maybe we can do it on 2 days or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
You would like to
Yeah.
say something?
So I will.
Yeah, please.
That today I will just send it to Tamer. And the Miro board, of course, will remain open. So you could try out on those skeletons already. And probably with Tamer, we will talk about the structure of the spring session when time arrives. But of course, if you have any suggestions or wishes on which aspects should we detail on this session, feel very welcome to send me an email. So you can prepare the content, or I can prepare the content for the second part, so that it is most useful to all of you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep. So
thank you very much for
thank you very much.
the invitation.
And
Yeah,
it's a
see you
pleasure.
soon.
It's a pleasure, and I would like to thank all of you. So thank you, and see you soon.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
thank you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. See you in spring.
Yep.
Yeah, Tama, I'm sorry, but
No problem. We have
maybe I can stop the record.